Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 299, which goes down this weekend. It's a absolutely stacked card. It's phenomenal. We've got superstars across the board, top to bottom. This is just insane. It's one of the best cards that I think we've ever had. And honestly, I cannot wait to watch it. I can't wait to break it down. Even from a betting perspective, I think there's so many good spots in this card. And even from the prelims, we've got Curtis Blaydes, Jailton Almeida. We've got Mateusz, Gamrot, RDA, Rafael dos Anjos, Pedro, Munhoz. These are guys that have main evented other cards, other fight nights over the years, and these are the guys that we've got just on the prelims, for example. So it's just insane. We've also got the long-awaited debut of MVP Michael Venom Page, which I know a lot of people are excited about. It's a great card. Like I said, I'm excited to watch it, excited to break it down from a betting perspective. It looks really good as well. So yeah, I'm stoked, as you can probably tell from the tone of my voice. And just before we get into the breakdowns, as always, if you're wanting to jump into the action, which I'm sure you absolutely want to do for a card like this, like I said, you look at some other cards. Last week, for example, wasn't a great card from a betting perspective, just a couple of spots. There's looking like a lot of good spots in this card. It's going to be a card that you're staying up for. If you are in the UK, Europe, you're going to be staying up till 6, 7 a.m. for this 100%. So, like I said, if you want to jump into the action, make sure you do that with MMA Play 365. We've got plenty for everybody, even if it's just a $1.99 dog of the week package where you get 2 underdogs. If they both lose, you get your money back anyway, but we've got next event subscriptions, we've got monthly option, we've got an annual option, and all the options include the Blaydes AI UFC prediction software, all the predictions from Blaydes AI from our artificial intelligence at MMA Play 365, and it also includes the handicapper content as well, which is my content. Even if you're just a fun parlay gambler, you just want to put, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 leg parlay on, then we've got that section for you. We've got written breakdowns on there, and also you can just follow my official bets as well, exactly where my money's going on which fighter, if that's what you choose to do. Everything for everybody, all inside one subscription. That's MMAplay365.com. Jump into the action this weekend. And that's it for the introduction and the promo. Let's jump straight into the fights. We've got 14 fights to break down. And of course, we start with the main event, the UFC Bantamweight Championship fight between the current Bantamweight champion Sean O'Malley defending the title for the first time against Marlon Vera. This is also a rematch as well. And it's actually ironic because when these two guys first fought, it was Sean O'Malley that was trying to make his way up the division. He was the young prospect that this was his test against an experienced fighter in Marlon Vera. He didn't pass the test. A number of people will have said that Sean O'Malley wouldn't then make it to where he is now as a champion after the way he lost against Marlon Vera. And you can't really blame people for saying that because you can only call what you see at the time. And Sean O'Malley didn't look that great. Marlon Vera looked like he just completely chopped him up. And now they're rematching with Sean O'Malley as the champion and Marlon Vera coming in trying to take that title from O'Malley as the contender. So yeah, it's a real interesting dynamic considering where they were in the first fight to where they are right now. And I think it's a really good fight as well. The one thing that you do have to take into consideration straight off the bat is, look, their last fight was 4 years ago. It was 2020. Sean O'Malley's had 6 fights since then. Marlon Vera's had 7 fights since then. So both fighters, in my opinion, are different fighters. Both fighters have improved. I think Sean O'Malley, it's a bit of a cliche, but I do think he's the one that's improved more. But like I say, Marlon Vera's in a title fight for a reason. Like, this is his spot. It's his time in his head to try and get that bantamweight championship. I don't think that he's going to get another opportunity after this if he does. If he doesn't take the belt. And to be honest with you, arguably there could be a couple of fighters in this spot over Marlon Vera. So I kind of feel like, look, Marlon Vera's paid his dues over the years. He had a very stop-start time early in the UFC career where he was trading wins and losses. And I think the UFC have recognised that, like I said, he's paid his dues and they're giving him this opportunity to try and become the champion against a fighter that he's already beaten before. So it's a good fight. I'm really looking forward to it. But like I say, I do think that The low kick, chopping down at Sean O'Malley is there again for Marlon Vera, but he doesn't seem to go to the well as much with that. Whether he changes it for this fight, knowing what he did to Sean O'Malley in the last fight, last time they fought, we don't know. I'm sure he's going to have a specific game plan. And Marlon Vera, he's actually got everything that you want to see in a fighter. He's got great striking, but it's dynamic striking, so it's not just punches. He's got a good tie game. He mixes in kicks. He's got good knees, good elbows. He'll split his opponents up. He's got power in the strikes as well. The wrestling's a little bit hit and miss, admittedly, but it's still decent. He's got great jiu-jitsu, a good submission game, good top game, dangerous off his back. He's got cardio, he's got durability. He'll walk through fire. He'll put on exciting fights. He's got everything that you want in a fighter except for one thing, and that's the volume. And this is where I have a real problem with Marlon Vera in these types of fights against the guys at the top of the division. I believe I said this before the Corey Sandhagen fight as well. Marlon Vera can get away with lower volume against a lower level of competition because even if he drops around, he'll pick the pace back up and he's a world-class fighter, so eventually he'll take over and beat them. But when you get into these world-class fighters, Sean O'Malley, you have to class him as a world-class fighter now, as a UFC champion. When you're fighting your Corey Sandhagens, these types of fighters will not let you off in that respect. If you start slow against these types of fighters, they will start taking rounds off you. They won't let you back into the fight, or even if you do start getting back into the fight, it's going to be really close. They're not really going to give anything away. They're not going to give anything easy. So what will have happened in that respect is Marlon Vera will have lost the first portion of the fight, start to look like he's coming back, but then it just turning into a relatively close fight, and that first portion of the fight that you've already lost then becomes really significant. I really don't like that with Marlon Vera. If he starts fights fast, I'm telling you, he's a savage. He'll be difficult for anybody to beat, but he doesn't. He's a very patient, calm fighter, and sometimes he can go way too far past that mark. Because look, sometimes it's better not to bull rush and overexert, but like I say, you can go too far the other way, and I think Marlon Vera does that. Against Sean O'Malley, he's going to start fast, he's going to be full of confidence, he's the champion now. He was already a super confident fighter that completely believed in his own skill set and abilities, and now he's the champion. I can only imagine that mental aspect of Sean O'Malley is just skyrocketing right now. I think that he's going to come out fast but not overexert himself. I think he's going to put volume on Marlon Vera, and it's going to be up to Marlon Vera to, like I say, chop away at the calf or, fight back a little bit. I do think 5-round fights are more suited for a Marlon Vera, but if Sean O'Malley gets up 2 or 3 rounds to start with, then it's going to be a nightmare for Marlon Vera to come back. Also, Sean O'Malley being tall, being long, he's got the sniper shot straight down the middle. He's also an elusive striker, will throw at crazy angles, kicks, punches. I think it's going to be a good fight. It's definitely going to be competitive. I don't think Marlon Vera is going to get ran through, but I do struggle to see Marlon Vera beating O'Malley unless he can stop him, and I'm just not sure he stops him again. I think O'Malley to stop someone like Vera, I think that's going to be tough as well. I think it's going to be a hard-fought fight that goes late, potentially goes to a decision. I think going to a decision is probably, a very likely outcome because, like I say, if Marlon Vera doesn't stop O'Malley, look, Marlon Vera is so tough. I'd be shocked for O'Malley to put him out. But like I say, I'm struggling to see Marlon Vera outworking O'Malley over the course of the fight for however long it plays out. And for that reason, I'm struggling to look past O'Malley in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Sean O'Malley to win this fight and still UFC bantamweight champion. And in the co-main event, this is, again, I think I'm going to say this every single fight. This is a phenomenal fight. We've got Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. And the absolute best thing about this fight, not only is it going to be absolute mayhem, not only is it going to be a bloodbath, not only is it going to be high-paced pressure from both fighters back and forth, it's going to be 5 rounds as well. This is another one of the UFC's special and rare 5-round co-main events that's not a title fight. And man, that was such a good decision. I believe it was Poirier that requested it. And yeah, the 5 rounds just works perfectly here. I think we'd be shortchanged if this was a 3-round fight. That's if it would have gone 3 rounds. But like I say, I do think this is going to be back and forth with Seen the toughness of Benoit Saint-Denis, in his UFC debut. He just refused to be put out. This guy's an ex-French Special Forces military guy, and, it shows he's tough. And we've seen, obviously, Poirier over the years. This dude is just, again, a wrecking ball. He's a guy with sick cardio. He's a guy that's tough, durable, will walk through fire. We know what Dustin Poirier brings to the table. And the fact that both of these two are matching up over 5 rounds is just phenomenal. I think that it's never nice to side against somebody like Benoit Saint-Denis, who has that pressure wrestling style. He's absolutely come out the blocks last year. He's one of the most improved fighters. He's a surging fighter, just going from strength to strength. And what he did against Thiago Moises, I think, is just absolutely shocking. Like, he was looking great before and people were getting high on him, including myself, But actually, not only beating Moises, but the way he did it, honestly, like, he deserves this shot against Dustin Poirier in a co-main event on a card of this stature, 100%. But he's got Poirier in front of him. Now, Poirier, he's going to bring experience to the table, years and years of experience. He's super well-rounded, so not only is he a good striker, southpaw striker as well, but he's also really educated inside the cage. He's great from a defensive wrestling and grappling perspective. He's been there, he's seen it all. I don't think that Benoit Saint-Denis is going to deliver anything in the cage that Poirier hasn't had to deal with before. And that's not to say that Benoit Saint-Denis can't win this fight. Like, he's a near 2-1 favourite to win the fight. So that's, that tells you what the public think of Benoit Saint-Denis, and getting a lot of respect against a veteran who's been in there literally with the best of the best over years and years of fighting. And Poirier's not over the hill yet. He's not declined. Yeah, he was knocked out in his last fight, but he got caught with an insane head kick. Like, Poirier is still there. He's not a declined fighter. He's still up there in the division. He could fight for a title, and I don't think anybody would question it. Like, he's still a world-class fighter. And over 5 rounds, I've just got a funny feeling that if Benoit Saint-Denis doesn't get Poirier out early, which I think is a very tough ask, not just for Saint-Denis, but for any fighter to get Poirier out there early, that's one of the toughest things to do. Poirier is, like I say, he's a durable, tough fighter that'll fight through fire. But if Saint-Denis doesn't get him out early, I kind of think Poirier takes over this fight the longer it goes on. And with the pace that Benoit Saint-Denis puts on early in fights, with the wrestling, the takedowns, all that sort of stuff, I know he's got good cardio, but eventually that's going to get to you. And what I think is going to happen in this fight, I think Benoit Saint-Denis is going to start really well. It's going to start at 100 mile an hour. He's going to pour hard strikes on Poirier, force Poirier on the back foot against the cage. I think we're going to see takedowns. I think Saint-Denis is going to take Poirier down a couple of times. I think he might have some good top control time, but not get him out of there with a submission or ground and pound. And I think Poirier might lose the first round, maybe the first 2 rounds. But I think the longer this fight goes on, the harder the takedowns start to become for Saint-Denis, the more the gas tank starts to be hit at. I think if he does take Poirier down, the longer the fight goes on, the easier it is for Poirier to get back up. And eventually, with the defensive wrestling and the defensive grappling, I think that Poirier starts to keep the fight on the feet. I think Poirier starts to take over with the striking. Maybe Poirier mixes in a little bit of wrestling late on as well when Saint-Denis is tired. And I think that if this was a 3-round fight, Saint-Denis wins. But 5 rounds, I think it favours Poirier. And like I say, it's going to be, if you are betting Poirier here as an underdog, and it is good plus money on him, it's going to be a sweat 100%. And I'm the sort of person, I've said it for years, that it's never a smart thing to do betting against the pressure wrestler that's going to be relentless and string 100 takedowns together in a fight and just completely be like glue and be all over the opponent. It's never a good bet. But in some spots like Poirier, you might be able to mitigate that a little bit because, like I say, Poirier is the one with the world-class experience, the championship fight experience, 5-round experience, and he's fought and beaten better of better level of competition than Saint-Denis. So I think that Poirier's got some upside here, even though the fight is going to be very competitive, and I think Poirier loses the first portion of it. So it might even be a good live betting opportunity. Let Poirier lose round 1, potentially round 2, then get him at an even better plus money line. But look, how you play that, if you're playing it, it's entirely up to you. But for me, I do think that Poirier over 5 rounds is going to be the more efficient fighter and will come out on top after it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Dustin Poirier to win this fight. And in the next fight, here we go. The first time I'll be breaking down an MVP fight on a UFC card on the podcast. We've got the debut of Michael Venom Page versus Kevin Holland. And like I say, it's a long-awaited debut for MVP. I'm sure a lot of people have wanted MVP in the UFC for a very long time. I know I have. He's a fighter that, at least everybody from England has been keeping an eye on for a long time. But obviously, he's an international fighter. Everybody all over the world knows who he is if you're an MMA fan. The one thing with MVP is I really hope that we get the best out of him here, because he is 36 years old, and I hope it's not a case of, he's making his debut a little bit too late. And I don't think that he is. We're obviously not going to get the longevity from MVP in the UFC to what we would have if he signed like 4 or 5 years ago, especially when he was bang in the middle of his prime. But I do actually think that we get a better version of Page right now for this fight, because 4 or 5 years ago, he still had these massive holes in his wrestling and his grappling. And I kind of feel, although that's still a weak area for him in MMA, that he has improved over the years in that respect. So I do think that we get a better version or a more well-rounded version of Page, where he might be able to keep fights standing now. And against Kevin Holland, this is smart matchmaking from the UFC. And I know that MVP is an underdog, and I know why he's an underdog, and I know what people want from Kevin Holland, but the UFC are really clever with the matchmaking. There's a reason why they're the best and the biggest promotion in the world. They know what they're doing. I think they'll have paid a lot of money for Michael Venom Page, not just for this fight, but his contract. And I don't believe that the UFC will want their brand new toy to break after the first time of playing with it. And I think that's the reason they've matched up against Kevin Holland. Now, the reason Kevin Holland's a favourite is because he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He does have good takedowns. He can get fights down to the mat. And that's obviously where MVP's weakest. But you look at MVP against a guy like Logan Storley, for example. Logan Storley just ripped him apart from a wrestling perspective. But Logan Storley was relentless. It was takedown after takedown. He was a former NCAA D1 wrestler. Kevin Holland isn't that. Kevin Holland is a guy that will hit opportunistic takedowns in certain fights, but I don't know how much you can trust Kevin Holland, A, as a fighter, and B, as a fighter to go in there and relentlessly shoot takedowns and try and take a fighter down that he should take down. And I'll give you the perfect example of what I mean. I'm going to be talking about this fight a couple of times on this card, but Della Maddalena, he fought Basil Hafez. Basil Hafez made his UFC debut on short notice. Could clearly tell his gas tank wasn't there. It was a short notice fight. But Della Maddalena was like a minus like 800, 900, maybe 1,000, minus 1,000 favourite in that fight to win. And arguably he should have lost, or he could have lost. And the reason why he could have lost is because we finally saw Della Maddalena taken down. We saw his defensive wrestling. We saw his defensive grappling, which left a lot to be desired, to say the least. Like, he was controlled on the mat by this newcomer that nobody had ever heard of as a massive favourite. So Kevin Holland, seeing that fight against Basil Hafez, fights Della Maddalena the fight afterwards. He attempted by the numbers 2 takedowns. There were half-arsed takedowns, and one of them was a kick catch where he tried to foot sweep right at the end of a round. He didn't go for takedowns in a fight where the previous fight of that opponent showed clear weaknesses, clear holes in his game, and Holland didn't try to exploit it heavily at all. He stood there. He wanted the striking battle. It was, just back and forth, strike for strike. It was a close decision, granted, but there was a path to victory there for Holland. There was a blueprint painted for him the fight before and he didn't take it. So what makes me believe that he's going to do that against Michael Venom Page? The other side to this is, you watch MVP fight, he likes to taunt his opponents, talk to his opponents, just try to wind them up inside the cage. And against Kevin Holland, look, Kevin Holland has had fights where he's not been playful and he's been serious, but he does from time to time revert back to that playfulness where he's talking to his opponent and chatting to the commentators outside the cage, asking DC and Khabib cage side for some advice in between rounds when he's got his corner team there. And I think MVP is going to bring that version of Kevin Holland back out, and that version of Kevin Holland doesn't fight very smart. Look what happened when Kevin Holland fought Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who, by the way, MVP is probably the closest type of striker to a Stephen Wonderboy Thompson that we've seen in the UFC, with the way he stands and moves and switches stances and strikes. Kevin Holland got finished by Wonderboy Thompson, but also he took Thompson down and then stood back up in guard and let Thompson back up. So there's a lot of trust issues here for Kevin Holland. He does have a path to victory for sure with the wrestling and grappling. That's why he's the favourite, but I don't think he goes to it. Or at least I don't trust him to go for it. And like I said, if the UFC really wanted to test MVP and potentially put him on a loss after his first fight, they'd have thrown him there against a Bilal Muhammad or a Sean Brady, someone that does have strong wrestling but a heavy top game that is absolutely going to go for that path to victory. He's absolutely going to hit that game plan and will absolutely smother him. But they haven't. They've gone for Kevin Holland, which makes a fun fight, a fun striking fight. And I think that type of fight favours MVP. He's too elusive, he's quick, he switches stances, and we've seen what Holland is like facing a striker like that in Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think MVP is probably a slightly better version than Wonderboy Thompson at this point. And like I say, I just don't trust Holland to get the wrestling going, get the takedowns and get top control. If he does, he wins. I don't trust it. So for those reasons, I'm picking MVP Michael Venom Page to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena. And again, I've just said it in the previous breakdown, we're going to be talking about the same fight a couple of times. So, Jack Della Maddalena versus Basil Hafez. Like I've already mentioned, Maddalena was a massive favourite in that fight, fighting Hafez on short notice. Hafez came in, he got takedowns, he got good top control time. He was even relatively, I wouldn't say massively deep, but, it would have been interesting to see more time of when it got to the end of the round and Hafez had the arm triangle on Maddalena. It only happened for a couple of seconds and the round ended, so it would have been interesting if there was another 30 seconds left in that round. But arguably, Maddalena lost that fight. I'm sort of on the fence with it. I think that, you can put 10 different judges in there and get a different, outcome each time. It could have gone either way, but that's not what you want to see from a fighter that's a hyped prospect fighting a newcomer as like a minus, I can't remember what it was. It was like minus 800, 900, something like that, a favourite. So now Jack Della Maddalena has got an absolute blueprint on him of how to beat him, because he's an amazing striker, fast hands, combinations, forward pressure, rips to the body, rips to the head. It's going to be really difficult to beat Jack Della Maddalena when it comes to the striking. Now, Gilbert Burns is, again, a veteran of the sport. I think if he stands toe-to-toe with Jack Della Maddalena, he's going to lose the fight. I still think that Burns is going to be, or would be competitive in that type of fight, striking for 15 minutes. He's got power, so he can always hurt any opponent with a big punch. But yeah, Maddalena is the better striker here. However, Gilbert Burns, does he go to the wrestling? Does he get his grappling going? I'm telling you now, if this fight hits the mat and Burns gets good control over Maddalena out, past that initial scramble, I think Burns is that gap in skill there is astronomical. Burns' grappling compared to Jack Della Maddalena's grappling is absolutely night and day. It is astronomically better on Burns' side. Like, it's not even close. It's just, does Burns go for the takedowns and get Maddalena down? And look, I've just mentioned this with Kevin Holland, that I don't really trust Kevin Holland to do that. And although Gilbert Burns has fell in love with his knockout power previously, and he's also a much better grappler than he is a wrestler, Burns still does go for takedowns. We saw against Wonderboy, he recognised that he wasn't the better striker in that fight, just like he's not the better striker in this fight. Wonderboy doesn't have terrible takedown defense. He has been taken down more lately than he has previously in his career, but Burns still got the takedowns against Wonderboy, or at least pinned him against the cage and took away that space, that striking space where Wonderboy is going to thrive. And Burns did a really good job. He stuck to a game plan and did put a number on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, comfortably beat him. And I feel like Burns, there is an element of trust there. I do think that he's going to do that against Della Maddalena, because Burns is a veteran, he is a smart fighter, and when it does come to putting a game plan together, he can stick to it. If this was a fight where he feels he's going to win on the feet, then he probably wouldn't go for takedowns. But this is a fight where I think even if he does test it out on the feet a little bit, I think very quickly he's going to learn that he needs these takedowns. And I think he can close the distance. I think he can at least pin Della Maddalena against the cage, try to chain wrestle a little bit, look for the, start with a double, chain to the single, look for body lock trips, maybe sneak around the back, that type of style from Gilbert Burns. And if he gets him down, great. Like I say, there's, a massive gap in skill there. But if he doesn't take him down, at least he's just, breaking the flow, the striking flow and fluidity of Della Maddalena. He's, again, taking away all that striking space, so Maddalena's not being able to activate his path to victory. I think this could end up being a really close fight, and when you look at, like I say, when you look at the paths to victory, there's a clear path to victory on both sides, but the gap in skill for me is much, much wider, astronomically wider from a grappling perspective than anywhere else, and for that reason I am going to be siding with Burns, so I'm picking Gilbert Burns to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is going to be a phenomenal striking spectacle. We've got Petr Yan versus Song Yadong. And like I say, this fight's insane. I think it's going to be won and lost on the feet. There might be a little bit of wrestling and grappling. You could potentially see it from both sides. But I kind of feel that the defensive wrestling and defensive grappling from both fighters will sort of nullify things a little bit, because I think the defense of both fighters is going to be better than the offense of their opponent. And therefore, like I say, if there is any takedowns, if there is a takedown completed, it's going to be tough to get, but then the get-up game should be good from both sides. I think we're going to end up with a 3-round striking fight. It's actually one of those fights where I wish that we had 5 rounds as well, but I suppose we can't be greedy after, getting the Poirier and Saint-Denis fight at 5 rounds. But look, it's an amazing fight, and both fighters are in completely different places coming into this fight. We've got Petr Yan, that is on a 3-fight losing streak. He's won 1 in his last 4. And then we've got Song Yadong that's on a 2-fight winning streak, 2 main events. But the reason I wouldn't read too much into that, just in case that's anybody's narrative, is, look, Petr Yan is, like I said, on a 3-fight losing streak, but he's only lost against the best in the division, and even the Sean O'Malley fight, which actually, considering that O'Malley's now the champion, that's a loss that's aged well, but that was a split decision where a lot of people thought that Petr Yan won, including myself. It wasn't a robbery or anything like that, it was a close fight, but I do think that Yan should have got the nod, and Sean O'Malley got the nod. It's something that happened, it happens in this sport, but like I said, Petr Yan has only been fighting the best in the division, whereas Song Yadong's wins, Chris Gutierrez, Ricky Simone, again, I don't really want to take anything away from Song Yadong, but those aren't at the level of Petr Yan. And yeah, look, even though Song's coming into this fight on form, I think that you can't really read too much into that due to the levels of competition that each guy's been fighting. But like I say, this is a striking fight. What I like from Song Yadong is he will put combinations together. He does have power. He does look like he's got good durability as well, so he can take damage. But there are moments in fights where he takes a little bit of time off, he's a little bit low volume, and even when you look at fight to fight, the volume, it's so inconsistent. Like some fights he can put out 100 strikes, but in other fights he really reins it in, doesn't really get much going, trusts his power a little bit too much, looking for the one punch that's going to end the fight. And then from the flip side of Petr Yan, he's not perfect there either in regards to volume. He's a typical 5-round fighter because he tends to take a round off at some point early in the fight. One of the first 3 rounds he'll take off and then builds in fights the longer it goes on. And in a 3-round fight, it's always a risk doing that, because if you give a round away, you haven't got many rounds to make up for that. In a 5-round fight, you give the first round away, it's okay, you've got 4 fights to make it back up. In a 3-round fight, you give that first round away, you've only got 2 rounds, and you're 1 round down as well. So, yeah, it's from both sides, the volume's inconsistent, because again, just like I said with Song, Petr Yan's got fights where he's putting over 100 strikes in, and yeah, it's tough with the inconsistency on volume, to the point that I think that both fighters are in a relatively similar boat here. It's just, I think that Song Yadong takes more time off just to recover a little bit, just to see where his opponent's at, whereas Petr Yan's taking that first round off, making reads, downloading the data so he can, really start being a savage after that point. I think that when you look at, like I say, the volume, I think the inconsistencies are very similar across both sides. And I kind of think if both fighters are low, if one fighter's low volume, the other fighter's going to be low volume. But if one really starts ramping volume up, I think it's going to force the other one to fight. So the volume side of things, I think, is going to be quite similar throughout the fight, whether it's high or whether it's low. I think both fighters will match each other there and match the output. But where the difference is in this fight, in my opinion, Petr Yan is the better quality striker by a long way. Like, I'm not saying that Song Yadong can't be competitive here. He's going to land punches. He's going to be dangerous. Petr Yan has absolutely got to mind his P's and Q's. But when it comes to the striking arsenal, the quality of strikes, the accuracy of strikes, the savagery of the combinations that are being thrown, the mixing of the kicks to the punches, that's all on the side of Yan, in my opinion. Yes, Song is going to be competitive. It could be a fight that we see a close decision maybe, but I just think Yan's got the better quality of strikes. He's also dangerous. I know Song's durable, but if Yan really gets it going here, and bear in mind, and this is no disrespect to Song, but bear in mind Yan is taking a massive step down in competition from his last 4 or 5 fights. Song Yadong isn't at the level of some of the fighters that he's been fighting. So this is a step down in competition for Yan at the right time on a 3-fight losing streak. And Yan's still only 30 years old, I believe. So he's still in his prime. He's still got a couple of years left fighting, at least in his prime. And he's on a 3-fight losing streak. He's not declining. He's at the top of the division, a world-class fighter. And these world-class fighters just do not go on 4-fight losing streaks at this level. Look, if this was a Tony Ferguson type of situation where Yan's 36, 37, being in wars, on a 3-fight losing streak, questionable levels of competition that he's been losing to, then yeah, you lean on the side of a 4-fight losing streak's a possibility. But even though it obviously is a possibility in this fight, I just don't see it. I think that these world-class fighters fighting at the top of the division, yes, you can take your 3-fight losing streak, but this is a fight I think that is tailor-made for Yan. Striker versus striker. He's not going to have to deal with too much wrestling and grappling. He's going to have a fighter in front of him that's ready to and happy to exchange punches and strikes, and that's exactly what Yan wants. It's going to bring the best out of him, and I think that we see a great performance from Yan, a Petr Yan of old, rather than a Petr Yan who's declined and, heading towards the end of his career, which I just don't believe that Yan is anywhere close to right now. So for those reasons, I'm picking Petr Yan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the heavyweight division, and I cannot believe this is a prelim fight. I really can't. We've got Curtis Blaydes versus Jailton Almeida. I absolutely love this fight. I think out of the entire card, this is my favourite fight of the night. Just stylistically, it's just so intriguing. Jailton Almeida, I'm going to go out there on a limb and say it, I think he's the smartest fighter in mixed martial arts, globally, worldwide. This dude doesn't have a weight cut. He's a 205er, he's a light heavyweight. That's his natural frame. But this dude he tampered with light heavyweight, he tampered at heavyweight and just chose the easier life at heavyweight. But what he's been able to figure out at heavyweight is, even though he's giving 30-40 pounds to the opponents who can weigh in at 265 pounds. In fact, let me have a look at Jailton Almeida's last couple of weigh-ins. His last 3 fights have been at heavyweight, and he's weighed in at 232 pounds, 231 pounds, and last time out 236 pounds. Bear in mind he's fighting Derek Lewis, Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Shamil Abdurakhimov, which I'm sure are coming at least, if they haven't hit the 265 pound mark, at least very close to it. So he's giving a lot of weight away, but what he's figured out is it doesn't matter. He can still pick these guys up like he would be able to pick a light heavyweight up. But the difference is, when you put a heavyweight, and I say this a lot, if you follow me, you follow the podcasts, I say this a lot with the heavyweight division. If you put a 265 pound man on his back, even if he has world-class jiu-jitsu and is a jiu-jitsu black belt, first degree, second degree, third degree, whatever it is, if you've got a heavy top game and you're a 265 pound man on your back, you're not going to be as agile to get back up to your feet. So actually what Jailton Almeida's doing is he's figured out that the strength advantage is not really an advantage to an opponent. He can still pick them up and rag them about. It's easier to control a 265 pound man once you've got him flattened out on the back. And the dude's having no weight cuts. Like, he's not killing his body to get to a certain weight. He's walking around at whatever he wants to walk around at. He can hit the weights, hit the S&C, so he's still got the power and the ability to take these guys down. And he's absolutely crushing it. Like, this is a big fight against Curtis Blaydes, but he's earned it. He's beating these big guys, but not beating them. He's dominating them. And it's absolutely hilarious, the amount of people that gave Jailton Almeida shit after that Derek Lewis fight. Or he should have finished him. Or he's boring. All this, that, and the other. Like, Derek Lewis is a powerful 265 pound fighter. And Jailton Almeida dominated him at this level in the UFC, absolutely dominated him. And another thing with Jailton Almeida as well, in regards to being smart, the dude's not taking any damage. Like, he's taking less than a strike on average every 15 minutes. It's crazy what he's doing, but what makes this fight so good is that Curtis Blaydes has got that caliber of wrestling. And this is what makes the fight so interesting, because Almeida has just been slicing through his opponents, taking them down, controlling topside. Nobody's got the jiu-jitsu, the defensive jiu-jitsu, to be able to combat the offensive jiu-jitsu of Almeida. And I think the same thing in this fight. I think that if Curtis Blaydes is put on his back, as good of a wrestler as Curtis Blaydes is, once you get flattened out, the wrestling's gone. You then go into jiu-jitsu, and that's Almeida's world. And I think if Almeida can get Blaydes down, he's going to be able to roll on top of him just as simply and easily as he's been, or at least making it look easy, shall I say. I don't want to disrespect any fighter, but Almeida makes it look very easy, but that's just a level of grappler that he is. And I think that what he did to Lewis and what he did to Rozenstruik and Abdurakhimov, he could replicate against Blaydes, but it's going to be a little tougher for him because he's got to beat Blaydes in the wrestling. And this is where Almeida, I think, might be able to approach things a little bit differently, because the double legs and the single legs might not be as available against Curtis Blaydes, who is a genuine wrestler, one of the best wrestlers in the heavyweight division. But instead, Almeida might go for body locks and trips, or try and sneak around the back and pick Blaydes up and dump him, and then, get a hook in against the cage and drag the fight down that way. More of a jiu-jitsu type of takedown, if that makes sense. So I think that Almeida, but even still, if I see Almeida double leg Curtis Blaydes, I'm not really going to be surprised either. Like, Almeida's got genuinely good MMA wrestling himself, and this is an MMA fight. It's not a wrestling bout where there's no cage or anything. This is MMA wrestling in an MMA fight, and Almeida's got good MMA wrestling. Where it comes to the striking, it's really tough to get a gauge on Almeida's striking, because he doesn't waste any time on the feet. He'll throw a few teep kicks or a big punch and then level change into a takedown. You can't really see too much of his defense because he's not absorbing any strikes, because he's taking his opponents down and wiping through them. So it's hard to get a real good read on Almeida's striking. But Curtis Blaydes' striking is actually, from an offensive perspective, it's decent. He's got combinations, he's got power, he seems educated and definitely improved over the years. Defensively, he can be open to be hit. We've seen him knocked out a couple of times now. But in this fight, I think it's going to be Blaydes trying to strike with Almeida, and Almeida just trying to find entries into takedowns. And I think Almeida's going to be able to do it. I think from a striking perspective, he might just be able to be defensively sound enough to prevent Blaydes from getting up on the strikes or, hitting him with anything too hard. A bit like he did against Derek Lewis. He was very cautious and wary of that, but that didn't stop him closing the distance and getting takedowns. And I think Blaydes might actually be a bit wary of Almeida taking him down. And does Blaydes want to go for takedowns himself? Look, I think if Blaydes tries to take Almeida down, Almeida will do a decent enough job of at least defending the initial takedown entry to cause a scramble on his way down if he's been taken down. And once the scrambles start, that's where the jiu-jitsu kicks in. I think he'll put Curtis Blaydes on his back. So I think Curtis Blaydes is going to try and keep this fight standing. I think Almeida is going to be the one that looks for takedowns. And I think Almeida's going to be able to get the job done. It might not be easy to start with, but once he's got Blaydes down a couple of times and Blaydes has felt Almeida on top of him and realised how good he is, I don't know whether Curtis Blaydes does start to break a little bit inside the cage. And this isn't the Blaydes of old where he's full of confidence and he's in his prime and he's coming out on interviews saying, I'm going to take you down. My opponent knows what I'm going to do, but he's not going to be able to stop me. This isn't that Curtis Blaydes. I don't think that Curtis Blaydes is as confident, in form and primed as what he used to be. And this, in my opinion, is Almeida's time, who's surging forward, step up in competition, fight after fight, but doing it the right way. And I think he gets a big win on a big card against a big name in Curtis Blaydes. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jailton Almeida to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Katlyn Cerminara versus Maycee Barber. Now, I don't know if I've just butchered that surname of Katlyn Cerminara. It's Katlyn Chookagian, for those that don't know. She's obviously married or maybe divorced, I don't know. But, something's happened from a married life, either positive or negative. And, she's now under a different name. And this is the first fight that she's under that name. So Cerminara is what I'm going with. Could have completely butchered it. We'll find out on Saturday night. But, yeah, against Maycee Barber, this is a typical Katlyn Cerminara fight against a fighter like Maycee Barber on a card like this at the top of or close to the top of the prelims. And this is basically the career that Katlyn Cerminara has had. She's fought the best of the best at the top of the division. She's been hovering around the top for a while. John Anik mentioned the whole gatekeeper terminology, during the last UFC event. And again, I think he made a good point of some people see it as a negative connotation, but a gatekeeper is a fighter that is going to prevent the upcoming fighters, if they're not ready, from making that big step up. And I think this is Maycee Barber's gatekeep type of fight. I think that she's on a 5-fight winning streak. Some of those fighters, arguable in regards to, level of competition, but they're all UFC level fighters. It's just last time out against Amanda Ribas, that was a really good win for Barber. And I think that's why she's got this spot here against Katlyn Cerminara. And the UFC are basically saying, shows that you're ready. She beats Katlyn Cerminara and then she's heading towards the top. And I think that Katlyn is very... she's very calm, relaxed, composed. She's well-rounded. She's got decent jiu-jitsu, decent wrestling. But the striking, she can get up in volume and she can keep herself safe as well. So it's going to be on Barber to force the action in this fight and really put it on Cerminara, because we saw that when Ribas actually put it on Cerminara a little bit, Ribas really started to get her on the back foot and Cerminara wasn't comfortable, and that allowed Ribas to grow into the fight. And that's exactly Barber's style. Barber isn't going to fear any strikes from Cerminara. She's not like a knockout artist. So I think that Barber's going to walk through the strikes. I think she's going to put the pressure on Cerminara, pour volume into it. I think Cerminara's, although her wrestling's okay, is it going to be good enough to take Barber down? Maybe. But again, if she's on the back foot, I don't think the takedowns are going to be that effective. I think this is a good fight for Barber to hit a 6-fight winning streak. Really make a name for herself here on a big card with a lot of people watching, and there's a big fight waiting for her afterwards if she beats Cerminara. But like I say, from the stylistic perspective, Katlyn Cerminara's got all the abilities to beat most fighters in the division, and even Barber. But that's only if Cerminara can really establish, at least the centre of the cage, and I don't think Barber allows to do that. The pace, the pressure, the power, the combinations, putting volume on Cerminara, forcing her backwards, I think is going to play into Barber's game so well. And for those reasons, I'm picking Maycee Barber to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mateusz Gamrot versus RDA Rafael dos Anjos. Mateusz Gamrot, honestly, is one of my favourite fighters in the UFC. I tend not to have or try to have too many favourite fighters rather than just having a favourite fighter, just watching the sport for what it is. But it's very difficult to not like Gamrot. Like, the dude is, no pun intended, an absolute gamer. It's the reason why he's called the gamer. And Gamrot's striking is decent, it's powerful, but it's a means to the grappling means to the wrestling, which then obviously leads to the grappling. And Gamrot's grappling is just unreal. The scrambles, the ability to, constantly advance position or maintain position during wild scrambles and have that magnet for that top position is just crazy. And this is where Dos Anjos is going to have issues in this fight. Look, Gamrot's, I don't think he's massively bettable unless you're, throwing him in sort of a bit of a fun parlay, but Gamrot's a decent favourite in this fight, like minus 350, and there's a reason for that. Like, look, Dos Anjos might be the better striker here, technically, but efficiently, I don't think he's going to be better. I think it's Gamrot that will just eat strikes if he needs to, but land hard strikes back and then just level change into takedowns. And what we saw when Michael Chiesa fought Rafael dos Anjos, I think the same thing's going to happen with Gamrot here, but just to a bigger effect. I think Gamrot's going to be able to get takedowns. He's going to be able to force the forward pressure on RDA. RDA is going to struggle to strike whilst moving backwards because of that. And I think once Gamrot starts shooting his takedowns, chaining the takedowns, getting RDA down, maybe RDA gets up a couple of times, you can't ignore the fact that RDA's got, a legit black belt in jiu-jitsu. But I think Gamrot will just completely and utterly just stay on RDA. If RDA is standing back up, he'll stick to him like glue, chain another takedown and keep getting him down until he's got him down, pinned down. And I don't think RDA off his back is going to have too much for Gamrot, who should be able to really get the job done. He might even find a finish against RDA with a submission. Again, he's not an easy guy to submit, but Gamrot, I think the pace, the pressure, the relentlessness, the takedowns, the top control time, I think it's all there for Gamrot, and I've struggled to see RDA being able to deal with him and cope with that type of relentlessness coming at him. So yeah, ultimately I think Gamrot's going to be a nightmare for RDA. And look, at some point I want to see Gamrot versus Benoit Saint-Denis, because that wrestling, those scrambles will be absolutely insane. I think that's a perfect fight night main event. Let's get 5 rounds of it as well. That's a fight for maybe another day, but right now, yeah, I don't see RDA giving Gamrot too many issues here. I think it's a good stylistic matchup for Gamrot. I think it's one that he can really shine in, and we've seen RDA crumble a little bit with that type of fight. Like I say, look at when he fought Michael Chiesa. Chiesa was just, on him constantly. Takedowns, position, RDA maybe starting to get back up, reshoot, mat return, more top control time, more positional time. So yeah, I think Gamrot does the same. I'm picking Mateusz Gamrot to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Pedro Munhoz versus Phillips. And I think this is, again, another interesting fight. Pedro Munhoz, he is getting up there in age a little bit for the division. He's still, capable of winning fights, though, for sure. Obviously, he's still got that hard low kick, that patented low kick that he's used for years, shutting fighters' calves down and winning fights because of that low kick. And that's something that Phillips has really got to mind his P's and Q's of in this fight, of just be aware that that low kick is a big weapon for Munhoz. The other weapon of Munhoz is that modified guillotine that we haven't actually seen in quite a while, but Phillips, he will shoot takedowns in this fight, in my opinion, so he's got to be careful of his head position when shooting him for these takedowns, because if he does get on that good side of Munhoz and Munhoz wraps up that guillotine, and it's a nasty guillotine because he traps the arm in it as well, he traps both arms, so it's hard for an opponent to tap. And yeah, like I say, we haven't actually seen it for years, but it's definitely another one of his weapons that he'll have in his toolbox, and he'll use it whenever he needs to and whenever he can, given the opportunity. But with Phillips here, I think that Phillips is a very dynamic mover, so he won't be static, he won't be there for the low kick, at least not too often. He'll be moving in and out of range, taking weird angles, striking from weird angles, and I think Munhoz will just struggle to get a read on him. And not only that, but Munhoz is going to have a 2-inch height disadvantage, a 7-inch reach disadvantage as well. So Phillips is going to be the taller, longer fighter who's going to be able to, again, just keep firing from these strange angles. So it's on Munhoz to close the distance, get in close, try and rip at Phillips. But Phillips, at least from the early part, from the first half of the round, his movement's good. He's hard to really find. And like I say, he's not going to be there for Munhoz's combinations or that low kick, or at least not very often enough for Munhoz to do the damage. Where Munhoz might have his opportunistic moment is if Phillips does shoot a double leg takedown against the cage and Munhoz starts wrapping up a guillotine. But even then, Phillips is a high level jiu-jitsu black belt, so he's not a rookie in there. He knows what a guillotine is and how to defend it, and he's probably done his research, even though it was from years ago with Munhoz's best weapons, and he'll have seen that guillotine. I just don't know whether that... The reason why Munhoz hasn't hit that guillotine in a long time, two reasons. One, obviously, it's an opportunistic move. It depends on a fighter shooting at you more often than not. But the other side of it is Munhoz has fought the best of the best in the division for a long time now. And, submissions like guillotines from guards, even though it is sort of like a specialist guillotine, it's not often it works at this level in the UFC. So I think this is a good fight for Phillips. Speed, movement... He's got the physicality advantages, taller, longer, rangier. I think he mixes kicks within punches really well. The one knock on Phillips is he can slow down in fights, so maybe Munhoz will pick things up maybe in round 3, but I do anticipate Munhoz to be a couple of rounds down by that point. I think, like I say, stylistically and physically, I think it's a good fight for Phillips, who should be able to, like I say, move well, strike well, wrestle and grapple if he needs to. Yeah, I think it'll be a good name for Phillips to take on his record, again on a big card. So I am picking Kyler Phillips to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michel versus Michal. Michel Pereira versus Michal Oleksiejczuk. And this is a good fight. I like the move up in weight for Michel Pereira. I like the move down in weight from Michal Oleksiejczuk. And it's actually strange because when you see them inside the cage, Pereira is going to be way bigger than Oleksiejczuk. So you would imagine, if you didn't know much about the sport or much about the UFC, you'd imagine that it's Pereira moving down in weight and Oleksiejczuk moving up in weight, but that's not the case. But the good thing from Oleksiejczuk's side is the fact that he's moving down in weight. Even though Pereira is big, he's physical, he's strong, Oleksiejczuk has been used to fighting up at light heavyweight. So he's fought and dealt with big guys up there. So it's not really going to be a shock to the system that he's got a big, powerful guy in Pereira in front of him. And look, with Pereira, I'm kind of glad that he's got past that crazy stage, because at one point you had two versions of Pereira. You had the crazy wild version who does spinning attacks, jumping attacks, somersault backflips to somebody in guard. He was crazy. He wasted a ton of energy in doing so, probably had maybe a round and a half at max of gas. But he does have a technical side to him, and you've seen the evolution in his game where he's stopped being crazy and just settled down a little bit. And it's a better version of Pereira. He's more well-rounded. We can hit takedowns as well. But against Michal Oleksiejczuk, I think Oleksiejczuk's got a decent stylistic fight ahead of him here. Now, if he is to win, if Oleksiejczuk does win this fight, it's 1,000,000% going to be hard fought. It's going to be razor close. He's going to have moments where it's looking like it's not going for him. But I do think it's a very close fight, because where Pereira can be got at... Well, look, just take the Ponzinibbio fight, for example. Pereira started well, but Ponzinibbio built his way back into the fight. Ponzinibbio was tough, he was durable, he'd weathered a storm, or at least a little bit of the storm, and took the hard strikes. And when Pereira started slowing down a bit, because, regardless of him not being him not using this crazy style anymore, he's still a big dude, he's still got muscle mass, and he'll still slow down eventually. But with Michal Oleksiejczuk, he doesn't slow down. He is a pressure fighter. He's durable. He's only ever been finished once. It was years ago. I think he was 19 years old at the time when it happened. And this dude gets hit with some hard shots. He's your typical Polish fighter. These Polish guys are born fighters. They're tough, they're durable, forward pressure. But Oleksiejczuk rips to the body and the head with combinations as well. So I kind of feel that Pereira's going to be the better fighter, really. But Oleksiejczuk will, sort of stay the course, He'll keep putting forward pressure on Pereira. He'll get hit, probably not get knocked out. That'll make Pereira think, oh shit, I can't knock this guy out. Then if Oleksiejczuk really starts pumping shots and combinations to the head and mixing it to the body as well, the body shots could be, real gold dust here for Oleksiejczuk, because the more he hits to the body, the more it'll slow Pereira down. And I think the longer the fight goes on, Oleksiejczuk starts to look a bit better. And I think we end up with a potential decision, even though both fighters are powerful and could get the knockout. If we do end up getting to the scorecards, we're going to see a situation where Pereira's won the first half of the round, Oleksiejczuk's won the second half of the round. Who wins? It could be a very close split decision type of fight, but the way you beat Michel Pereira is by being able to take shots, being durable. That's key because he hits fucking hard. But being able to keep pouring the pressure on, pouring the forward movement on, and just ripping him with combinations to the body and the head and just making it tough, not going anywhere, being there constantly in his face. That's the type of fighter that beats Pereira, and that describes Oleksiejczuk pretty much to a T. So I think it's going to be a close, hard-fought fight, but I think it's going to be a close, hard-fought win for Oleksiejczuk. For those reasons, I'm picking Michal Oleksiejczuk to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the light heavyweight division. This could be wild as well. We've got Philipe Lins versus Ion Cutelaba. Now, this is actually a rebooking because these fighters were due to fight in October of last year. And what's actually really strange about this is, I'm sure the fight's been booked for quite a while, but there doesn't seem to be any odds for it at all. I've looked across the US books on fight odds. I've looked on best fight odds. I've looked on the odds checker, which is the UK and European bookies comparison site, and I just don't see any odds for this fight whatsoever. If I remember rightly, last time they were due to fight, I think Cutelaba was a very slight underdog, maybe even a pick'em, and then money came in on Cutelaba and pushed him out to a favourite and pushed Lins into a plus money underdog. So I think that's what happened last time, if I remember correctly. So again, with these rebookings, they usually open where they closed before the fight was cancelled last time. So I do anticipate Cutelaba maybe being like a minus 150 favourite, and we'll see which way the market moves depending on which way the public bets. But from a betting perspective, from a fight prediction and analysis perspective, I think that, look, Lins has proved a lot of people wrong, including myself. I didn't really give Lins too much hope, especially when he came down to light heavyweight, but he has been putting some good performances together. But if you want Cutelaba, I just think that he's a very deceptive fighter. He's also a bit inconsistent as well. With performances, you'll see some really good performances, and then you'll see a lackluster one, and then maybe a couple of them, and then he'll come into a really good performance again. But I think he's training with the right people. I'm sure he's down at Extreme Couture, which definitely suits his style from a wrestling perspective. He's got a Greco-Roman background, so I think Extreme Couture being a wrestling heavy gym suits him. I think it will help improve him as a fighter and ground him a little bit as well, because Cutelaba could get a little bit too emotionally invested in fights, get a bit angry, and start to fight maybe outside of a game plan. But I think somewhere like Extreme Couture with Eric Nixick and the other fighters around him, I think it grounds him a little bit. And once he's grounded and he's emotionally not as invested, I think we then start to see a performance from him where we see a true skill set. And Cutelaba is a dangerous striker, powerful striker, but his wrestling and grappling is really where he's good, and that's where I think that he's going to beat Lins here. I think Lins is one of these fighters that's pretty standard all round at this level in the UFC. He's an okay striker, he's an okay wrestler, he's an okay grappler, but I don't see, unless Lins just lands a punch that knocks Cutelaba out. But then again, Cutelaba's tough and durable. That's not to say he hasn't been knocked out before and he can't be knocked out here, but generally speaking, he's tough and durable. But outside of Lins just landing a punch and knocking Cutelaba out, I think Cutelaba's a better quality fighter. Like I say, the wrestling and grappling I think will be key here. I think he'll get the takedowns he needs. I think he'll get his top control time as well. Cutelaba can also be relentless with the takedowns. It does affect his gas tank, but that tends to be sort of later towards the end of the fight where he's probably already done enough to win anyway. So yeah, I think Cutelaba's got a good fight ahead of him here for Philipe Lins. Interested to see the betting lines to see if they do open where they closed last time. But yeah, I think it's a good fight stylistically for Cutelaba. I'm picking Ion Cutelaba to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a UFC newcomer making his UFC debut on a big card like this as well. We've got Robelis Despayne making his UFC debut versus Josh Parisian. Now, Robelis Despayne, you probably have seen the viral videos that have gone around the internet. You know, he scored the fastest knockout in Fury FC. He's an Olympic bronze medalist in Taekwondo. So he's got this crazy Taekwondo background as a heavyweight, but then he's got this raw power. And yeah, he looks like he's an absolute wrecking ball. And he's a big favourite here on a card that's going to have a lot of eyes on him, even though he's low down in the early prelims. But it's a good card for him to really showcase what he's about. We haven't really seen too much from a technical perspective from Despayne because, like I say, he's a wrecking ball and he's been putting these dudes out. You know, he's 4-0, 4 first-round finishers. The combined fight time of his last 3 fights is 19 seconds. So that's over 3 fights. 19 seconds he spent inside the cage in his last 3 fights. So he's crazy. The one place that I worry, or the one aspect about this fight that I worry about for Despayne, is the fact that out of these 4 fights, his first 3 opponents were all 0-0, making their MMA debuts, and then the 4th fight he fought someone that was 1-0. So he's been fighting guys that are making MMA debuts or have only 1 fight experience. Here he's fighting Josh Parisian, who's 15-7. Not only has he got a ton of MMA experience, more than Despayne, but Parisian's also had multiple fights in the UFC as well. So he's got the feel of the UFC. He's been under the bright lights. Whereas Despayne is coming in for his UFC debut and he doesn't have that experience. He doesn't even have the experience in MMA. And like I say, the level of competition is absolutely night and day on the advantage of Josh Parisian's side. So it's got all the potentials. This fight has got all the potential of being a potential banana skin for someone like Despayne, who's coming in there and, you know, he's going to have so many new things happening for the first time on such a big card. So, yeah, it's a potential banana skin, but I do think that it's a fist fight at the same time. And for Parisian to beat Despayne, he's going to have to come forwards and, you know, try and punch him in the face because it's a fist fight. And I think that's where Despayne gets Parisian. I think, again, like I said earlier on with MVP and Kevin Holland, the UFC know what they're doing here. If they wanted to put Despayne in there against a fighter that is going to cause him like serious problems and potentially put him 0-1 in the UFC, then they'd have given him a different opponent. Josh Parisian, he's at that lower level in the UFC in the heavyweight division. That's no disrespect. He's a heavyweight fighter and, you know, anybody that ever fights in the heavyweight, they've got that to be proud of. But Josh Parisian is the lower end of the heavyweight division. And I think the UFC absolutely know what they're doing. Even if Parisian comes out here and instantly shoots a takedown, I think Despayne has got to be prepared for that. And he will have been prepared from the second that he came into MMA, because he already had a striking background. Him and his coach know that fighters are going to want to take him down because of his background and because of how much of a wrecking ball he is. So I think he'll be prepared, but I don't think Parisian comes straight in and the first thing he does is shoot a takedown. I think he's going to try and get range, try and throw a few strikes to start with, and I do think it's going to be another early knockout for Despayne. So I'm picking Robelis Despayne to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got CJ Vergara versus Asu Almabayev. Now, before Almabayev came into the UFC, this is his second fight in the UFC. His debut was against Ode Osbourne. I bet Ode Osbourne in that fight as an underdog. And the reason I bet him as an underdog is I wasn't sold on the level of competition that Almabayev fought outside of the UFC and how some of those fights were much closer than they should have been, including like a split decision win against Zach Makovsky, who had been in the UFC years and years prior to that. So there were a few concerns that I had with Almabayev, but after watching him against Ode Osbourne, I do think that, I'm not going to say he's the real deal yet. When I say that, I mean that's a fighter that's going to make his way to the top of the division, but there's a possibility there. I do think there's something about him. His wrestling and grappling looked really good against Ode Osbourne. His striking looked good as well. He does look like he's the complete package. Now, the thing is with CJ Vergara, he's also the complete package. Decent striker, decent wrestler, decent grappler. And he's got good attributes as well, like good forward pressure, good durability, pace, cardio. Like, he's a difficult fighter to beat. And that's the be-all and end-all of CJ Vergara. Like, if you can get past that physicality and those attributes of the pace and the pressure, then you've got a good chance of beating Vergara. And I think Almeyda's going to be able to do that, even if it's just a case of shooting takedowns to shut Vergara down a little bit, to stop the fluidity of Vergara's game. The thing is here, I think Asu Almeida is slightly better in every area than Vergara, and that's going to be a key difference in this fight. Like, I think every area is relatively close. I think the striking's going to be close. I think the wrestling's going to be relatively close. I think the grappling could be close. But Almeida is just a little bit better in each of those areas, and that should then provide an opportunity for Almeida to be able to take this fight wherever he wants, and also have Vergara questioning inside the cage, thinking, well, okay, the striking's not worked, but neither is the wrestling or grappling. Well, what do I do? I think it's going to be that type of fight where Vergara will be competitive, he'll be in there for as long as it lasts, but I expect Almeida to come out on top eventually, even if it's a bit of a slow start, which I'm not saying it's going to be, but I expect Almeida to have his hand raised at the end of the night. I just think he's, like I've already said, he's just slightly better in every single area of mixed martial arts. And for those reasons, I'm picking Asu Almeida to win this fight. And the final fight to break down for UFC 299, we've got Joanne Wood versus Marina Moroz. And I think this is a tough out for Joanne Wood. She's 38 years old now, so that's very old for, the weight that she's fighting at, the division. And I'm not saying she's completely like over the hill and completely declined, like she's going to eat one shot and get knocked out, but she's definitely not the fighter that she used to be. She hasn't fought in about a year, so maybe it was good for her to take that time out, but she's taken time out after a split decision win. Or, it does. I didn't really even need to say split then. She's taken time out after a win, which is normally a bit strange. Fighters normally sit out a little bit after a couple of losses, but I'm just not sure she's at the level as what she once was. Like, she was on the cusp of a title shot at one point, but I'm just not sure she's there anymore. Like, you look at her last 3 wins, you've got that split decision win against Luana Carolina, who's not one of the best fighters in the division. You've got a decision win against Jessica Eye, who I believe is retired from MMA now. Then you've got a split decision win against Andrea Lee, a fight where I thought Andrea Lee actually won that fight. But Andrea Lee's on a bit of a skid herself, could potentially be out of the UFC at some point in the near future. We don't know. Again, I'd never wish for any fighter to lose the job or any man or woman to lose the job. But yeah, look, that's the reality of being in the UFC. So that might be a case of that. I just think that, I don't know. You could make the argument for Joanne Wood that her losses have come to, Katlyn Cerminara, Jennifer Maia, Lauren Murphy. I think she won that fight personally. Murphy went through a stage of, robbing split decisions. Tyler Santos, even though she's not with the UFC, top fighter. Alexa Grasso. So you've got all the losses from Joanne Wood that have been against good fighters. So that's the argument back on Wood. But against Marina Moroz, she seems to be coming into her own. She's on a 2-fight losing streak herself, but again, losses to really good fighters. She's 32. I think she's still improving a little bit, better by better, fighting out of American Top Team, good group of girls over there. So yeah, I think that it's going to be a close fight. When it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think that's more likely to be on the Marina Moroz side. The striking's going to be pretty close, but again, I like the aggression and the pressure of Moroz and just trying to pump out a lot of volume. And I just think she's the younger, hungrier fighter who's still in a prime, whereas you've got Joanne Wood, who's 38, past the prime, probably, on a decline. We'll find out more after this fight about how that decline actually is, but look, when it's coming to trust a fighter here and picking a winner, it could be relatively close, it could be competitive, but there's just more upside for me on the Moroz side. So for those reasons, I'm picking Marina Moroz to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. I know it's been a little bit of a longer one, but we had 14 fights to break down, and the card's absolutely phenomenal as well. So there's a few fights that I definitely wanted to spend more time on. So yeah, thank you for tuning in as always. Like I said, I know it's been a long haul of a card, but hopefully you've got some good insight from a betting perspective with the predictions and the analysis. And if you are wanting to jump into the action, as you've probably been able to tell from the breakdowns, I do my research. I know what I'm looking at for certain fights. Long-term winner, jump onto MMAplay365.com. You not only get my predictions, my analysis of my bets, but you also get the UFC prediction software, Blaydes AI. You get the full card from Blaydes AI, all the predictions, a percentage for every possible outcome on either side of every single fight on the card. So that's all in one subscription $5 for one event, $10 a month, $99 for the year. Plenty of value in all packages. Join the fun, join the action. MMAplay365.com is where it's at. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the card on Saturday night. It's going to be an absolute banger, and we'll see you again next week.